Welcome to the Presilience podcast, Episode 5, with Dr. Paul Johnston. I'm your host, Joe Saunders. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Presilience podcast. Today, I have the tremendous honour of being joined by our behavioural scientist, Dr. Paul Johnston. Paul will go into his background a little bit, but he is a very engaging personality and a great mind when it comes to behavioural science. And today, we'll be getting his thoughts on the behavioural, emotional, and psychological elements of the COVID-19 situation, the response, and we're looking at things from an individual point of view today. Paul will be doing a webinar later this week. It's probably out by the time you're listening to this on organisational elements or organisational behaviours that may be of interest during this COVID-19 response. But today we're focusing on the individual and some of the impacts this is having on individuals and some strategies that individuals can put in place to manage their own emotional state and those around them. So this is a very interesting conversation. And just before we get into the interview with Paul, I just want to make sure everyone's doing okay out there. We're doing our best to support our clients through this craziness that is happening around us, and doing our best to try and present COVID-19 not just as a crisis, not just as a threat, but also as an opportunity to really embrace the concept of presilience and to come out the other side stronger than we went in. If you would like some assistance with that, we have a range of services and mentoring and advice available. Please do not be afraid to hit us up at any stage at info@risk2solution.com. We are more than happy to hook you up with whatever it is you need to help your business, your organization, or your team through these challenging times and to come out stronger than we went in. Without further ado, here is Dr. Paul Johnston. I'm joined here by Dr. Paul Johnston, our behavioural scientist from the Risk2 Solution Group. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
It's great to sit down and have a chat with you. It's unfortunate about the series of events that have led us to having this conversation, but it's always fun to converse with you any opportunity that we get. Paul, for the sake of those that haven't read your bio, can you give a little bit of background for you academically and professionally, just to set the scene for what we're going to talk about?
Yes, no dramas. My background's actually, I'm a behavioural scientist by qualification. Have 25 years experience in safety and security risk management. Started off mainly in operational roles, having worked in the military and the criminal justice system, before then going to the dark side of consulting, and I've worked with some of the leading engineering firms in their risk, security and sustainability teams. More recently, I've done more of a capacity development role with a number of organisations, including lecturing on the postgrad course and the grad cert in the psychology of risk through ACU. And I'm the lead risk consultant with Risk2 Solution.
Excellent. So you're well qualified to talk about the topic at hand, which is COVID-19, but more particularly the behavioural and emotional side of the response and the implications of this whole crisis. Now, you're going to be doing a webinar with us on Friday where we're talking about the business implications, especially from the human side. But we thought it might be a good opportunity to use the podcast to talk a little bit to individuals about the impact that this is having on the individual level and some sort of strategies that we can put in place to help people manage this situation, or rather an unprecedented situation for most of us in quite trying times.
Very true.
So, Paul, just generally, what are some of the big things that you've noticed over the last couple of weeks as the restrictions have started to ramp up? Our response from a government and global point of view has started to gain steam. We're getting a lot more media messaging to the point where we're now doing live updates pretty much every 5 minutes. What are some of the implications you're seeing on people's well-being and mental states?
I think it's ironically, the more information that we try and provide, I think we're actually creating white noise. It's the amount of information that's coming through and the selectiveness that people are having in terms of interpreting that. I was actually out of the shops yesterday just picking up some of the essentials, and you could actually see we've gone over the last couple of days essentially from the attitude of it's not going to affect me to the point that you could actually see the fear in people's eyes. So I think at this stage, I think people are taking on the information at a very I don't know, it's hard to phrase it. It is concerning what I'm seeing. They're actually taking it on not just to take action, but I think it's a real fear has settled in.
Do you think that's just because people are feeling like it's out of their control? Do you think there's an element of that being, that's feeding that unhealthy fear, is just not knowing what to do to keep themselves safe?
I think that's one of the key points. In fact, I was speaking to someone the other day, and we actually raised that very issue. And a point that I brought up to them, and it's emergency management 101, is control what you can and manage what you can't. And I think people at the moment are trying to take control back over things that they have no control over. What I suggest is they accept the fact that it is actually a highly volatile situation, control the elements that they can in terms of personal safety and family safety, and manage the other components.
Yeah, it's an interesting take on that, especially when you look at the early stages where we had massive panic buying of toilet paper, of all things. As a behavioural scientist, you must have been sitting back sort of in quiet wonderment of the behaviours that came about. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and it's kind of a weird discussion. I actually spoke with a colleague who's studying Eastern medicine at the moment, and it was really a conversation, took an angle or a direction I didn't think it would. But if you look at it, we're actually grown adults and they're actually sitting there and talking about toilet paper, which is really sad. It was interesting. If you think about day one when that actually occurred, from a behavioural perspective, it would have only taken one person to get a bit of a panic and get a couple of packs of toilet paper. And then someone in the same aisle would have said, well, do you know there's something I don't? So they would have taken some. Then someone up the end may have already been a bit sort of tentative, and they would have jumped on board just to be either because everyone else is doing it or they thought they missed out on something. So the snowball effect would have been substantial. And then this colleague actually brought up a different issue, and this is one I didn't actually think about. Is that, and this would be a different term for this podcast. Apparently, Australians and in particular are very reluctant to talk about their toilet habits, and that probably is panicking people as well. The fact that they feel extremely vulnerable, and that's one of the things that we didn't see coming as being their source of control.
Yeah, that is really interesting, isn't it? And you almost sort of see the same psychology with the hoarding of toilet paper as we did with when stock markets crash. Yeah, as soon as someone starts selling rapidly, everyone else looks around and go, "What do they know? What have they heard?" And you start seeing this massive dumping of stock, just based on pure herd pack mentality of what one sheep starts running and the others start following because they might have seen something that they haven't seen yet.
And it's amazing. I mean, we've actually seen people in the stores with the food as well. The shelves are just actually starting to restock. And it's amazing when you go up and down. It's almost a sport now just to see what's actually on the shelves. But I actually heard people say, take the flour. And someone said, you don't know what to cook or how to cook it. They said, just take it.
Yeah.
So it's that real panic is setting in. And it reminds me of, I can just refer back to some organisations I've worked with. And it's funny, they talk about organisational resilience. And I think we've even heard the politicians say that our community is a resilient one. The Australian community is a resilient one. And I don't like the term resilience, particularly in organisations. When I hear an organisation say that we have resilient staff, it means that they're used to breaking them. And I know this sounds really pessimistic, but that's what I've noticed in some organisations. The term that I prefer to use, and I think that's where we need to see a real change in mindset in organisations, government and the community. I think it will actually flow downwards. Is that concepts of presilience, where it's not just learning from what's actually occurred, but it's being more proactive and increasing our situational awareness around the situation.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, this has been the Presilience podcast. We're all about that. But the idea of being ready beforehand and being able to see these challenges on the horizon or at least have some sort of plan in place. And we're having a chat offline about preppers and stockpiling of resources, and people going to ground in this sort of chaos. I think there's extremes where we don't necessarily need to go to that kind of extreme, but I tell you what, I can guarantee that those of us that know how to cook and had some basic supplies on hand, or I actually had a delivery service of toilet paper, I can't imagine how much more stressed I'd be if I didn't have those kind of luxuries, It's just a little bit of Presilience to be ready just in case.
Well, it's funny you say that, because every year when we get the storm season, every state government gives the same edict, the same promotion every year to have 4 to 5 days of food readily available in your house if you lose power. And we do that every year, and then never sparks any panic. And people never do it. And now that we've actually got something on the doorstep, well, it's not just on the doorstep, it's arrived. And that sense of community preparation, which we thought we have, is starting to unravel very quickly. And it's a really interesting study in terms of the psychology of modeling behavior. There's things which are coming out of this that were not expected.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. My thoughts have been that the true impact of COVID-19, while obviously the deaths and the strain on the health system are catastrophic and tragic, but I feel like the longer lasting impact will be on the psyche of those of us that have dealt with it, and the confidence in the system, and potentially just the recovery mentally and emotionally from this.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. See, my background is in industrial safety as well, and we often find in those situations where there is a critical event, and I'm not a fan of the term crisis, where there's been a major incident, where there's been serious injuries. People generally change their behaviour and their psychology, if you like, for a number of months. But then it goes back to pre-incident. And we've actually even saw that in the bushfires in Victoria. I was involved with a consulting firm. We went down to 12 regions after bushfires in Victoria in 2009. And I won't name the areas, but we went to some of the areas which were hit most significantly by the bushfires. We went down 6 months after the fire. And as you'd expect, we saw a very risk-adverse community. We went down another 6 months after that, so 12 months after probably one of the most significant bushfire event was seen in recorded history. And people had gone back to pre-incident behaviour. They actually started to plant trees near their house.
Yeah, wow.
So it'd be interesting to see what happens in this case.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see whether the scale of this impact will make a difference, or whether we will be back to business as usual in 12 months or 2 years, or however long it takes to, for the ramifications to be under control, or whether we take this as an opportunity to learn and to evolve.
I think one of the first parts of that is to get some clarity is in terms of where it's going, which is some are saying 5 months, some are saying 18 months, and the fact is we just don't know. But,
yeah, I'd like to actually get you to expand upon that, because I think just from the conversations I've had, one of the hardest things for people to comprehend is that the goalposts keep moving. We don't know how long this is going to last for. We don't know where the restrictions are going to end. And I'll just get you to maybe unpack a little bit the impact that has on people's psyche of just a lack of certainty.
Wow, I think you've said it yourself just then, the lack of certainty or the lack of clarity around issues. People actually fill in their own gaps. And although we're doing the right thing in providing information, people, I think, are turning off. I would say some people are turning off the mainstream media because it seems to be contradictory. And they're going to alternate sources. I think one of the main challenges in the types of in incidents such as this, with pandemics, is that we get a day-to-day a better understanding of what we're actually dealing with. Now we know that the virus actually can stay in your hair and on your clothes, on surfaces for quite a period of time. So that will change how things are managed, and people unfortunately aren't taking that fluency well.
Yeah, do you think there's an element of the messaging around that? I mean, maybe that wasn't communicated as clearly that this will be an evolving situation. And I think if we're talking about the Australian audience, we're quite used to disasters being something that we've seen before, whether it's a cyclone, whether it's a bushfire, even if it's bigger than what we've seen before. We still are relatively familiar with what the responses are going to be and how long the recovery is going to take. And usually by the time the cyclone is blowing through, that within a day we've got a repair bill as such of what we expect is going to cost to get things back moving. Our insurance providers are pretty well equipped to figure that all out very quickly. Do you think maybe with this one being really unprecedented in terms of the scale of the pandemic and the response, the impact it's had upon us, that maybe needed to be communicated a little bit more clearly that this is an evolving situation and it will be?
I think that's spot on. The fact that it is a different situation. I think one of the main concerns with people, or the main impacts, is that we can't see this. We can actually see when a fire front's gone through. Well, we know when we're actually in the eye of the storm, so to speak. When cyclones come over. But this is something which we can't actually see, and it is unfolding. And the problem is it could actually mutate as well, which means that may actually change the controls again. And I don't think people are cognizant of the fact that we're dealing with a virus here and not a hard cast sort of, something that I can grab, physical agent, such as fire or a storm. And it's that lack of certainty.
Yeah, I mean, even it's kind of cruel that we've had this breakout immediately after the catastrophic bushfires, which again were more or less unprecedented in terms of scale. And but I think even then, at least we knew that as soon as the fire season was winding down and we started to get some rains, it would eventually be under control. And we knew what measures we could take to try and preserve life as much as possible in the meantime. With this, as you said, it's evolving, it's mutating, the controls are changing, and we're learning about it on the fly, while at the same time trying to control human behavior, which is the most critical aspect of controlling the spread. Maybe there's a conversation to be had there about the trust that people are actually placing on media and on the government now versus, let's say 50 years ago.
Well, I think we've never been more connected in terms of technology, but people are saying we've never been more separate. And I think we're actually seeing that. The survey was actually taken. I can't report the source, unfortunately. I can't remember. But a survey was taken in Australia, and most people that were surveyed were pretty content with how the government was handling it. But they were concerned about the media coverage and the sensationalism. And I've got to give an example here, and this just amazed me. It was last week, and I won't name the news channel, but it's probably across the board. They were telling people in the very first story to stop panic buying, that stuff will be replaced on the shelves. It's just going to be a bit slow in terms of business as usual. They're asking people to stop the panicking. Then the very next story, they didn't even go to a commercial break. The very next newsreader says, as the international pandemic disaster continues. So they're just, that message is what people cling on to. The what's in it for me, that point that, that self-preservation. And people are concerned because it's not the lack of clarity just in itself, but I think it's the bombardment of information. Where do they go for clear information?
Yeah, and that has been a struggle, I think, because certainly in my generation and most of the millennial and Gen X generations that I talk to, we've kind of developed a healthy mistrust of the media and perhaps an unhealthy mistrust of our governments. And because of that, it's like, well, who do you trust? Do you trust the messaging you're getting from mainstream news? Do you trust what you're hearing at the podium from the nightly press conference? Do you trust the government-funded media, or do you trust your friend who says his uncle works at the hospital and has a master's in biology that he got in the 70s? Who's the trusted source here?
I'd say pick one. It depends on college, I think, in your own experience. We're seeing the bombardment of the information is just phenomenal to see the amount of stuff that's on Facebook, on YouTube, on news channels, and some of it is quite contradictory in terms of what's actually coming out.
Yeah, it's To be honest, I mean, in our role, trying to help our clients through this, I find one of the most useful things that we're doing is essentially just kind of filtering and going, okay, what's being said, what's realistic, what's accurate, and what's sensational, and can we distill that into something that is easily digestible so that people can actually make like plan an action. Because at the moment, when you get 5 different pieces of information that are contradictory, nobody does anything.
No, it's paralysis by analysis, if not just fear kicking in. I think it goes back to what we were saying before. Bushfires, we know what to do. We get all the information. We get the same sort of media coverage when you think about it. But people are used to a bushfire scenario. They're used to floods. They're used to cyclones. This is a whole new animal, I suppose, for people to get their head around. And we've heard about this, it was seen in movies, and all of a sudden it's actually on our doorstep. So I think that's really all adding together to create a bit of a perfect storm, if you like, in terms of the public reaction.
Yeah, let's just switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more positively, I guess, and proactively about what we can do to mitigate these impacts. I mean, let's talk first personally about controlling your own mental and emotional state and your own actions. Like, do you have any advice for people that are feeling overwhelmed or not knowing which way to turn?
I think the mantra that I've been telling people is what I said before: is control what you can and manage what you can't. The fact is that we are going through a transition. Do what you can to actually stay safe. I would say simple steps. Simple steps. Take some time to be with family. Use mindfulness. I mean, it's a buzz phrase that unfortunately has been overused, but just take some time. Sit down. Take advantage of the fact that there is there is quiet. You can't go out. Make sure that you do have the essentials at home, but don't overstock. Not only does that feed, I think, the anxiety for yourself, but it also shortens the resources for others. So I think the main coping mechanism would be is just to sit back and take stock of, well, what can I actually manage here? And what is actually honestly required to get me through the next couple of weeks, as opposed to this pending sense of Armageddon, which isn't coming.
Yeah, that's right. Also, probably a slightly different perspective on that is for those that are, let's say, in a leadership role, but that could quite easily be a parent trying to explain the situation to their child or their teenager or whoever. But it could also be an organizational, operational leader, perhaps who's leading staff in the front line. What sort of advice would you give to them in terms of controlling their messaging and how they explain the situation?
I would actually say once again as to be positive, but not. It sounds not overly rosy, if that makes sense, but be positive. I mean, people know what's happening out there, but show that they've actually got a element of control. So, okay, we are doing this, we are doing that, and I think an important part is not just to communicate your confidence and your ability to take some control of what you can, but to acknowledge what's actually getting done well. The PM actually did that the other day. It was a real marked change in his communication. He went from "you shall, you shall, you shall" to "we're doing a good job. Congratulations. Let's keep it going." And we know that simple psychology of leadership and reinforcement, that simple acknowledgement, that positive pat on the back, as subtle as it may be, can be a really massive morale booster and help the team come together.
Yeah, we were talking offline yesterday about the stick and the carrot approach, and the stick loses its effect when you check the news sites, and every 15 minutes there's a new stick. After a while, the stick starts to lose its novelty a little bit, and you just accept that you're taking a beating. And it doesn't really seem to matter how you change your behavior, because other people aren't changing theirs, and you're all going to get beaten for it no matter. So I think that that was an interesting change over the weekend in the Prime Minister's language and messaging about what we are doing is having an impact.
And it's those small things, and I don't want to be critical of the authorities, but it's just an interesting observation in community psychology. Let's put it that way. When they actually closed the beach in Bondi last week, and people actually jumped the fence and actually went through. That was a concern to me on a number of levels, not just the fact that they defied a lawful order, if you like, but it actually almost could set up in some groups the fact or the mindset that we can actually do this. So I think we need to take small steps, do small measured controls, and give that positive feedback a lot more regularly than what we're actually doing. And particularly as leaders, as you said, leaders, that means organizations, our family, friends, acknowledge what's working well and say, well, okay, that seems to work for us. So what else can we do? As opposed to dwelling on the negative all the time, which is just so easy to do.
Yeah, I almost wonder whether they would have been better off putting up shark warnings at Bondi rather than putting up fences. Maybe then the personal motivation would have been stronger.
And I'm not sure if I would have done anything different because it was the distancing issues and they had to do something. So I'm not being critical of their decision because I honestly don't know if I would have done anything different. But it was just an interesting observation in terms of the effect of the community. I don't think they saw that coming. So we're starting to see that real concern and concern and fear, I think, once again. So reinforce what we are doing well, take control of the situation that you can, particularly in your own micro ecosystem, if you like, in terms of family or workplace, and maintain the lines of communication. I know that is a cliche, but maintain the lines of communication, take time to just be and avoid the stress.
Absolutely. I think it is a little bit of a cliche for us because we talk about it so frequently about turning risk into opportunity. But I do feel there are opportunities here through this pandemic for us to grow as a society, to grow as organizations, to grow as individuals, if we can focus on the right things. And we're already seeing that with so many offers of generosity and help within the community. There's so many individuals that are doing small things to help others. And I think this has a great potential to improve those community bonds, provided we can focus on those elements.
Oh, definitely. And I think, you hear about, you're prioritizing tasks, the high payoff and low payoff activities. Something a really simple gestures such as, just assisting someone next door, massive impact in terms of that person, and the community around them. So I think you make a good point, is that this is, as weird as it is, this may be an opportunity for us to actually come together. And I'll give you an example. This is weird. I moved to this part of Brisbane, the northern suburbs, a number of years ago. And about a week or so after, one of the biggest storms in history here actually went through. It was like a gurney went through. But it was interesting that it took that for everyone on the street to come out and say hello to each other.
Yeah, similar here actually. I've only just moved house a couple of weeks ago, literally about a week before all this started. And as it started, we thought, we need to actually go out and meet our neighbours. And because of that, we found out that, the house next to us had a lady that had just started chemo. So she's in a high risk group. We had another house with a son with Down syndrome. So there's another high risk group. And it just sort of built an awareness of who around us need to be protected. And it really has galvanized the street in a way that those of us that are young and healthy are doing grocery runs for those that can't. It's just little things that make a huge amount of difference. And I hope will be remembered when we go back to some sort of normality.
And just on that, not only does that assist the person on the receiving end, and let's be honest, it actually assists you as well. It gives you a sense of control back. It gives you that, hey, hang on, I can do something. And it gives you a good feeling. I know that sounds a bit corny, but it gives you that warm and fuzzy feeling, which at the moment is what we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I firmly believe that in the absence of knowing what to do, you should lead. And I think if anyone is sitting around waiting for someone else to tell them what to do and they're getting frustrated, then the answer is to step up and start leading and start doing what you think should be done. And you'll be amazed how often it improves the situation.
Well, and Australians are known for that as well. We've seen that, with the Mud Army in Brisbane, when we had those, they just started to arrange things. After bushfires, I was with the Rural Fire Service as a volunteer for over a decade. And you saw that in the community after a bad bushfire went through. This is by no means any different. We're just actually dealing with the different risk exposure that we have to get our head around.
Yeah, just a topic to get to before we run out of time. I'd like to get your thoughts on if this is prolonged, if the self isolation or the isolation quarantine is prolonged, and we're talking 6 months down the track, where we've had limited face to face social interaction. We've had businesses has had to resume in a more remote or teleconference fashion. I'm looking forward to the massive developments in web conferencing technology, which will come in the next couple of months. I'm sure that's going to improve dramatically. But just on a human level, we've never had a time in human history where we've been so physically separated for a prolonged period of time. Do you have any insights into, one, what impact you think that might have, and two, how we need to manage that?
Oh, wow. There's a big question to finish it off. We could have started with that, would still be going.
It's all right, we've got no time limit. Keep going.
Wow, that is a hard one. I think it comes back to the personal psyche. I know that sounds a bit weird. Some people will just go back to normal. Great, we're back out again. Some people will actually be more appreciative of, if you like, the freedoms of going up the street and having a coffee. But we will actually see some which will become more isolated. They will actually, and I hate to use the term, but there's no other way to encapsulate it briefly. Some people will actually become what I would term is almost institutionalized. That they will not be comfortable in going out. There will be that real reluctance. And I think the important part of this isn't just responding to the virus that's here. It's the recovery stage is going to be far more crucial in terms of re-engaging in the community, supporting business when they actually start firing up again. But supporting the local members of the community that may be feeling isolated, because that would definitely happen.
Absolutely. I'm curious about how the lifting of the restrictions will take place. I think it's something that needs to have a lot of attention placed on it, and I'm sure they are. I'm sure our leaders are putting a lot of attention on what the exit strategy is. If we look at it from a military context, I mean, we see some of the biggest mistakes made in military history have come when an invading force doesn't have an exit plan, and they leave a power vacuum behind, as we saw in the Middle East. And I kind of see the same scenario potentially applying here. If we suddenly lift all the restrictions, we're going to see every bar and nightclub is going to be full. Every stadium is going to be full. Every church is going to be full. Everything is going to be flooded. And I think if we don't have the virus completely under control, we could see a catastrophic rebound, whether it's from the virus or whether it's just from overexposure of humanity, I guess. But it is interesting. I think it's something that's going to take a lot of planning to do properly.
Yeah, and people aren't thinking about that. I think they just want to get through this stage. But
Exactly.
It's interesting you say that, though, because some of the epidemiologists have actually said they're concerned about China, for instance, is that they said they've passed it, they've got it tackled. And people now are going out about it. And their concern is there going to be a second spike, a second wave? And I think that's something that has to be measured as well as it's going to be challenging, but maybe a gradual, as you said, reintroduction of normality. And I know that is going to be really hard to sell to the masses, but I can see the logic to it.
Yeah, it's. I'm glad people smarter than me are making those decisions. I'm smart enough to see the potential problems, but I'm not quite smart enough to come up with the solutions. So I'll just run the podcast and ask other people.
In your defense, I'm not sure if anybody has. This is uncharted territory in modern time. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see the way the planning actually rolls out, but they will be looking at those. We're in the response stage. Now we have to think about the recovery and the withdrawal, as you said. That's going to be more important than the actual the initial response, I think.
Yeah. So look, I guess just to wrap things up, to summarise your key takeaways for listeners is focus on what you can control, manage what you can't control. Take time to be with your family, use technology to maintain relationships, and really just be mindful and being centered, and take advantage of not being run off your feet.
I think that'd be a nice summary, actually. Probably one more point which sort of builds on that is, I know I did say to just be before, but I think that's a big element, is take this opportunity to actually explore other options. in terms of the way you spend your spare time. And I know that sounds a bit strange, but you may be surprising what actually comes out the other side.
Yeah. I know for my family, this Easter weekend, we are turning off the Wi-Fi in the house, and we are setting up the tent in the backyard because we normally go camping over Easter. So we're doing it in the backyard this year, and setting up the fire pit, and I'll be unreachable for a solid 4 days. And I think that will be a welcome relief. Although I am curious to see, what hits my news feed on the Tuesday morning.
No, but I think that's a great way. It's a bit of, it's a bit of self-help, if you like. It's a bit of, it's a microtherapy, but it's normality. That's what you're introducing.
Yeah, that's it. And again, it's just introducing more things you can control and eliminating more things that you can't control. And I think that's a really excellent framework to leave our listeners with, is just that simple mantra: control what you can, manage what you can't. All right, Paul, thank you very much for your time, mate. It's we could talk for hours, as we have done many times in the past, and I'm sure we'll get you back on the show to talk about other topics in the very near future. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your conversation and for your insights, and look forward to doing it again.
Thank you, Conser. I enjoyed the opportunity.
Thank you to Dr. Paul Johnston for his time. If you'd like any more information about our offerings, head over to www.risk2solution.com, or for our online courses and webinars, head over to www.r2s.academy. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay presilient.